like the most rigorous part of the lesson.
Okay.
So what I did, and because part of it is that we don't teach every single poem. We do teach a lot of them, but we don't teach every single one. So what I know says here, what tasks or texts are most necessary for students to achieve mastery, and which will create the most productive struggle.
Okay.
So the poem that I picked on page 48 was How I Feel About Attention. I'm just thinking about the intellectual prep guide. I said, well, what do I want the kids to know and be able to do? And which is standard RL 9 to 10.2, which is determine a theme or central idea of a text and analyze in detail its development over the course of the text, including how it emerges and is shaped and refined by specific details. Xiomara is her name. X is developing. So I thought, like which poems could like really show aspects of her development.
So with a reading standard, this is, you still have to write something or speak or say something to explain what you did with the reading.
Write a paragraph or some form of writing that enables the student to explain how they determine the central idea. The objective that I wrote is that students will be able to state, so there's the writing piece, right?
Okay.
But it doesn't have to be writing. Sometimes it's talking. How Xiomara relates to Medusa and how her knowledge of this comparison helps her to better understand herself. What is the task or the text that where the productive struggle lies? Like, where is the rigor in the lesson? So kind of just asked myself, and I just started typing and thinking about it after I read the poem. And if this poem is both rigorous and also relevant, or like has some cultural relevance to the kids. And we agreed that it did. So in step 2, I asked myself, okay, what's the most rigorous part? Where can I leverage student voice, students' opinions and perspectives, and helping them to interpret? So the most rigorous part of this particular poem is that they have to understand the schema of the illusion of Medusa. And illusion is like a literary term. Is it possible that they don't know that? I knew that some of the rigor is going to either have to be to guide them in some research on Medusa or to provide them with excerpts about Medusa so that they can learn about her. And I was able to find like 3 or 4 clips from Google that had photos, but that also had the story of Medusa. Do I have them do it on their own? Because it's telling them too easy. Right? And then I thought that the second part that is rigorous is finding the specific pieces of evidence or lines in the poem that will help them to determine the central idea, right? And help them kind of figure out what Elizabeth Acevedo is saying about Xiomara's. The other piece is the productive struggle, which I think is that it has to be meaning making that they do. I can't tell them. So I have to create some kind of close reading. For me, and in English, automatically we go to like a close reading activity where the students we maybe read it all together once. Then after that, they read on their own. I came up with, and that's like the next page. Yeah, so I just came up with a handout where they could then on their second and third reading make meaning out of the specific stanzas. I think that a scaffold could be that I could ask them questions in the different boxes for the stanzas to kind of guide their thinking. I want them to understand the sensory images and like what are sensory images. Because for Medusa, as soon as you think of Medusa, you think of the snakes in her hair, right? The thing about Xiomara is that she's Dominican and she has this like unwieldy curly hair that she hates. So a big part of her self-concept is like dealing with her hair. And that's also cultural capital. That's also thinking about how our students could relate, even though none of our students are Dominican, but they could still relate to that idea, I think. So I want to bring that out. How do I leverage their voice? In a couple of ways. For sure, in the close reading, it's going to be like independent, but then in pairs to leverage their voice so they could speak to each other, and then in whole group. And if I ask the questions that are rigorous and relevant, then I'm going to be able to leverage their voice really well. Like they're going to have an opinion about how she feels about her body. And so it has to be layered. So it has to be first independent, then pairs, then whole group. Right?
Yeah. Love it.
When I think about leveraging their cultural capital, what I think about specifically, first, of being a person of color, that Xiomara is, and then second, being a girl or a woman, a girl on the verge of womanhood. I think that's a big piece that we have to reference. So how is that archetypal story, that myth, relatable to like a young girl of color now in South LA? And I think there's a lot of ways to relate that. It's confusing being a teenager, and there's so much conflict and there's so much struggle, and I think that I really want them to understand that self-love is really hard when there's so many things around you that are ugly. Box 3, which is to create an exemplar. So I want to say first that exemplars could be, what you expect students to say, like in a seminar or in a discussion. It doesn't have to be in writing to be rigorous. But I also think a teacher to write it out for themselves is important, even if it's going to be something that you're only going to hear the students talk about. So you could get a sense of what you expect the answer to be. So for me, I said, well, I want them to write a paragraph. In one paragraph of at least 8 sentences, explain how Xiomara's comparison of herself to Medusa illustrates her self-concept. Use at least 2 pieces of evidence to support your interpretation. So I wrote it first, then I wrote my answer, then I went back and revised my question, because I was like, oh, what I wrote, what I expect, isn't what I asked. So then I'm like not asking the right thing. Writing the exemplar for me clarified the question I wanted to ask, which I thought was really important. She further states that she is waiting for others to stop. That's a 10-sentence paragraph. It's and it has like 4 quotations and parts of quotes. But the exemplar for me tells me that part of the lesson also needs to be showing them how to introduce quotes, how to incorporate them, how to use only parts of a line as part of your own sentence. But that's more for you to understand what it is you want them to know. So then you say to yourself, oh, do I show them this exact thing as an exemplar? Do I think about ways to let that guide me in other ways that I demonstrate parts of what I want?
Or like scaffolds too,
do I create scaffolds from that? That's really focusing just on 2 and 3. Once you get to 4 and 5, that's where all the details of like, how do I actually like do this in a moment come in. The idea is that in intellectual prep is that if we start with the rigor and we figure out what we want to do around the rigor, the individual pieces of my lesson that evolve out of that become like really grounded in productive struggle, rigor, and standards, and that's cool.